Which side is my best side?
You don't have a bad side, Dean. So.
Ah.
Actually, that's not true. I saw Sleuth, so.
Hey, I was acting.
So we say.
Yes.
Um,
There's a little bit of every character in us. I'm Dean Whitlock, and I've been with the Parish Players since the day I arrived in Thetford in 1973. And it was one of those cases, the happenstance. My wife and I, the best man at our wedding wound up being a grad student at Dartmouth in math. And after being in the dorm for 2 years, he wanted to get out, and we wanted to get out of Boston into someplace less citified. And one of the people he knew in the dorm was the choir director at the Hill Church, who was also a grad student, and he learned that there was a room coming available. In fact, a whole half of a house coming available where the Strohmeyers were, their house. They rented half of it. And he and our friend Mark were going to each take a bedroom, and there were 2 other bedrooms, small ones downstairs, and upstairs there was a large bedroom big enough for 2. And we said, what the heck, and moved up. And I arrived first, and there was a rehearsal going on in the backyard. This was summertime. They were putting on a production. It was the world premiere of the English translation of a Spanish play called The Lady of the Dawn. And the woman who was the costume master at Dartmouth at the time was also spoke Spanish, and she had done the translation and was putting on the play, directing it. And that is when, and our friend Mark was the stage manager, and Neil McGlathry was in the show, along with Lynn and Bonnie Irwin. And boy, I don't remember the other people, but I remember them, and they have been our closest friends ever since. It was, you asked Duncan, is there a reason? Does the Parish Players have anything to do with why you came back here? And it was certainly the reason why we stayed here. We were in a family to begin with. Now, Mark and I and Sally had done theater in college together. And Sally mostly backstage. She was very good with makeup, with costumes, and I'd done a lot of set building, mostly lights though, and we wound up doing all of those things as you do in the community theater, and designing and building a lot of sets, and she would do the interior decorating, and we'd hang the lights too. But back then, the Parish Players, because Linda and David were just so into it, so energetic, they would do 3 or 4 full-length plays a year, plus 2 productions that were evenings of 1 act. And that was after we got in the Grange. Before that, they were doing summer work in their lodge, as they called it, a big summer room only off their house. And did theater in the church, did theater a couple of times here in the old Grange Hall. But then we did living room theater. We used people's homes. And they did it first in their own house in the winter, in their living room. And then we had several other people volunteer to let us use their houses. And for 2 or 3 years, we did this living room theater, moving around different places. Then the Grange became available. And at that point, it really took off. And lots of people showed up. We were other than Dartmouth, than Hopkins Center, we were the only thing going at the time. The Old Church Theater was in a down phase. Every now and then a play would appear there. There was a summer rep in White River Junction that lasted only 2 years after we got here. It had had a long history, but it just faded at that time. The Hopkins Center did summer rep for a while, but that also faded. So there was only their winter programming and the Parish Players, and that's what you did for theater. But I'm glad to say that despite having no competition, we managed to put on a lot of very good shows. And people kept coming back and kept telling us how much they liked it. So we kept doing it. Well, apart from the fact that we've been around for so long, there's always been a sort of a wave of new people who come in, and it surprised me. I did a ton of stuff in the 70s, into the early 80s. We had a son in 86, and things slowed down, but we kept doing it. I started writing and publishing fiction, and almost withdrew for a couple years, almost completely from the players, but there was always somebody else coming in. People would move out. Our friend Mark, who did a lot of stuff, he left after he got his degree and went off to be a math professor. Neil went away for a while but came back, but there was always people coming in to take over and to fill in the gaps, to create new things. So we maintain the momentum, and we still put on a lot of shows every year. And they tend to be very good shows, very well produced. We find good actors. People who act now, not only here, but also up at Old Church Theater, which has come back and has done tremendously. NCCT started in mid to late 70s. They drew a different crowd, doing just a couple of things. Then there was Loon, Light Opera of Norwich, which David Strohmeyer was responsible for starting. And that became Opera North. Things came back, but in the midst of all that, the people who have acted at the Parish Players, who were really into it, also acted in these other shows and shined there as well. So I think one of the things that's made us special is eclectic programming, leaving the musicals to those who love to do it, but also attracting good people. Well, actually, the transition happened very soon. As I said, when I arrived, there was a show going on in their backyard that was directed by another person. And when we did the living room theater, those were, generally speaking, directed by different people. Linda and David directed, but they didn't direct constantly. They were the force behind it, absolutely. But they were happy to step back and have other people come in and direct. I directed in, when was it? 77 or 78, Midsummer Night's Dream. And I also directed a play I wrote in the 80s. I haven't done a whole lot of directing, but I've done some directing. Jill Tyler started directing. She directed the original production of Sleuth, but she did other things as well. She did the poster for the Midsummer Night's Dream, for example. She's an amazing artist. And she acted. She was the original Belle of Amherst here. Let's see, and didn't Jill, I think she also directed, yes, she directed The Doctor, not The Doctor in Spite of Himself, The Hypochondriac, which I had the pleasure of acting in. So there was a lot of changing of roles. I mean, as I said, also did sets and lights, wrote some plays, worked backstage in a variety of ways. I produced a couple of times, but I hate it and will never do it again. And there was that interaction of people who could do all these things. One of the things that Linda did do, though, was determined to try to make a living at it. So she got a grant to start a touring company. And then she got a state grant to hire somebody to take care of the Grange. And that was in 75. It was the first year we got the regular agreement to be in it. I got the job to take care of it. So a little story about that. I was the first person to come into the Grange after the winter. The Grange only met during the warm months. So they had closed up in October or November, their last meeting, gone off, and I came in March, right after we got the agreement to use the place all the time. And I came walking in, went upstairs. There was a landing and then a second set of stairs that went up to what was going to be the dressing room and green room. A lot of changes since. And there was the desiccated bones of a cat lying on the floor that had apparently wandered in and got closed in after the last meeting. And for several years after that, people claimed to hear a cat. And at least during one summer show, while people were on stage, a cat wandered in from outside and walked onto the stage in the middle of the show. And we decided that was, the sort of the mascot was the ghost of the cat that inhabited the Grange when the Parish Players first moved in. And I at times wish that we'd get a few more of them back to get the squirrels out of the costumes. But on the other hand, we don't keep it open enough, and it wouldn't do to find another dead cat up in the Grange. So this was 1975. We were in the Grange, and Linda really wanted to have a professional touring company. And so she managed to get grants to get it going. She auditioned, and a lot of people showed up, people who stayed for a while, who did great theater, and some of whom are still here doing it. And they started as a school touring company, and they arranged to go to different town halls, to different schools, to put on different types of plays. And it lasted for about as long as they could get money for it, because they simply couldn't earn enough money to do it. And the funding ran out, and Linda got distracted by wanting to become a minister, and David got distracted by a whole bunch of other interesting things. So it essentially, that impetus died. But for a while it was really exciting, because there was this professional cadre that was, going out way beyond our own community and doing theater as part of the parish players. And I think that helped the reputation of the company, helped to bring people over, and brought new people who did stay and do the community theater as well. So it was really a wonderful part of the time too back then. The 70s were a very vital time in that way, in this surge of growth for this group, and I think in the Upper Valley in general.
I think I first came to the Fantastics here, and would that have been in the late 70s?
Late 70s, yes. Yeah. And David Strohmeyer was in that. And I'm trying to remember who directed it now. I've forgotten who directed it. That's the only musical the Parish Players has ever done, except for a couple of Gilbert and Sullivans when David was starting to get Loon going. The Fantastics, which is a great show, and was very successful here, was the only musical the Parish Players did. And part of it was that there was nobody here besides David who wanted to do musicals. And he got involved in doing the Gilbert and Sullivan and Light Opera of Norwich. And NCCT was doing a perfectly good job putting on musicals, as was Dartmouth. So the feeling was, why bother? Let's stick with what we can do well, which is, Shakespeare, classics, but also contemporary theater. And the Seahorse and everything in between. So that's what we did. It's the formula that worked.
Do you have any favorite roles that you've played?
Oh, let me count them all. There's been very few I haven't liked of the roles I've done. I have to say that I love doing Scrooge, and I was far too young when I did it. I was in my late 20s, a lot of makeup involved. And then years later, when we did Dickens of a Christmas, I got to play several scenes from A Christmas Carol again as Scrooge when I was too old for the role, actually. When you look at the play and look at it carefully, you realize that he was actually in his 50s at the time of the play. And I love doing The Odd Couple with Neil McGlathery. I love Sleuth. I love doing Milo Tyndall, and I love doing it 37 years later, getting to play Andrew Wyke. But one of my favorite roles, I have to admit, was in a play called Home that Jill Tyler directed. 4 people in it, took place in an insane asylum, and I was a lobotomized patient and had no lines at all. I was on for maybe 5 minutes. And it was a tremendous play to be in with 4 really good people, and to get out there and do one little turn of wrestling with furniture. It doesn't matter the size of the role. It's what you make of the character. And there are small roles, and they're wonderful. Don't let anybody tell you there are no small roles. There are, and they're great. I love them. That's why we do the 10-minute plays. One of the things that really has made this place stand out is the fact that it has encouraged people to get into theater who've never done it at any level. And the 10-minute plays is part of that. It continues. But we've produced plays that were written locally before. And before the 10-minute plays became such a thing around the whole country, we were doing one-acts done by people and even full-length plays done by local people. But we've also encouraged folks to come into what might be an intimidating situation because we have a reputation for doing really good theater. And yet we open the doors and we provide one-act plays, 10-minute plays, ways for people to get started. And some people who've gone off and had professional careers who've never acted before. I'm thinking of John Griesmer in particular, but Neil McGlathery went off and tried his hand and hated New York and came back. And it's open. The doors are open. Come in, join us. We'll welcome you here.
Saying the Detroit Red Wings.
That's because he tried to say it too fast, you see.
Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah, as Andrew Wyke, I was always able to put on the British accent, so I had to speak in very clear diction, which meant that I stumbled a lot less often than I might have. The Detroit Red Wings.
Overfed.
Yeah.
Again.
When did you guys do that show?
We were far too old. We were probably the oldest two people ever cast in that play. So it was 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, I was 61 or 2, you were 64 or 5. I don't know. How old are you now? 83?
I'm 70.
That's right. You hit the decade. You are a septuagenarian. And I'm right behind you, buddy.
Cool.
The thing we've, I was going
you
to
go
say,
ahead.
the thing that we've done mostly together, and it's something that I think is important about the Parish Players, is that Openfield School for years and years did a benefit-raising circus. It was a pretend circus, and we brought together kids and we showed them how to pretend to be acrobats and do clown acts. It was a whole 3 performances in an afternoon, 45 minutes per show, and it was just a bunch of little clown acts. Parish Players supported that. It was in here for a number of years, and it gave Neil and I a chance to do a clown duo and then a clown trio with our friend Robin for many years. So we didn't actually have to perform on stage as Parish Players, It wasn't until the circus was over that we finally wound up doing The Odd Couple together.
All right. Yeah, the clown acts were a gas.
Yeah.
Dean was always the brains. I was always the straight man. Sometimes I get clubbed. Sometimes it was, it was dangerous actually to work with
Right,
Dean.
yeah, right. You guys got me so wet with water, I got very ill once, but we didn't have to go there. And my wife Sally would quietly add in these ideas. She was actually the brains, if you want to know the truth. She had a real sharp eye for fixing the things that we'd gone too far with. And Robin Ellison was just a genius at being totally off the wall, and also at scaling buildings, which is a good skill to have if you want to be a clown. So, but the fact is that the Players was open that way too. Other groups come in, and supporting them dramatically was something we did.